All right. Hi, Safia.
Hey, Renee. So I'll start off with a little bit about myself. I'm a sophomore at Northwestern University. I'm studying computer science right now, and my two sort of concentrations at university are artificial intelligence and interfaces. I'm really excited about thinking about how in the future we're going to create intelligent experiences for people. A lot of the data science work that I do now is educational. So one of the really big projects that I'm working on is a 9-part series on data science that's designed to be like a very gentle but practical introduction to data science. And I've been teaching that for the past, I want to say 4 months now, and it's been a huge, always fantastic to see people coming in with not a lot of knowledge and walk out with kind of tools and techniques that they can apply to a lot of the things they're really interested in. And just on the side, playing with open data sets is something that's consistently like on the back of my mind, and creating visualizations. And that's what I'm up to right now.
Okay, great. So I saw in your bio that you started programming when you were 13 and you were teaching yourself. So let's go even earlier than that. Going back to childhood isn't too far for you as opposed to some of my other interviewees, because you're only 19, right?
Yes, I'm 19 years old.
Okay, this is great. So what was going on in your childhood that kind of indicated that, were you really good at math, or did you have people around you that were programming? What got you into it before you were 13?
So that's a really great question. I wouldn't say I was super genius best at math. I was in the gifted program in high school, so I guess or in elementary school. So I guess I was good enough. I don't consider myself one of the best, but I'm probably selling myself short. I got my first computer when I was around 7, 8 years old, and I did what most 7 and 8-year-olds do on their first computer, which is play a ton of Flash games. And I would say the sort of pre-story to how I got interested in programming was I was actually really into design before I was into programming. And this is where I'm probably going to get myself in trouble. But I used to not be able to afford Photoshop because Photoshop is expensive, but I really wanted to work with Photoshop. And so my first experience with really seeing the computer not as this thing that you click buttons in or that you play games on, and it's something that you build for, was trying to hack Photoshop so that I could get it for free beyond the 30-day trial. I was obviously unsuccessful because I'm not in jail right now. I think
people will forgive you as a 7-year-old doing that.
This was around 10 years old that it was happening. But it was really starting to kind of figure out that there were these things called system files and DLLs and registries, and that there was a BIOS, and the machine was something that was made.
So were you just like Googling these topics and reading about, how other people did it?
Yeah, I would be on like ridiculous Russian forums figuring out how to hack computers, because that's just what I thought people did. I honestly did not have any role models who were technical to look up to. And so I built my own image of what a hacker would be, and it was just kind of me in my room trying to get Photoshop to go beyond the 30-day trial.
So what did you want Photoshop for? Were you going to design images for games?
Yeah, I was really interested in just like visual graphic design. A lot of what I did was just take 2 images that were completely different and kind of create sceneries. And it was definitely an artistic endeavor. And I think it's so interesting because I'm much less of an artist now, and even in kind of like my data career, I'm not too into the visualization side of things. So I completely veered off that path. But that's like the pre-story to the story of how I got into programming.
So what was your first programming language? How did you start?
So I started off with Python. And the story of how I got into programming, I think, is super funny. I was also really into documentaries right around when I was 12, 13. And I watched a ton of documentaries. And at one point, I watched this really fantastic documentary series that covered the history of computing. And at that point, I had no idea that there was like a history to this, and it sort of talked about Turing and his work with the bomb in World War II, cracking German codes. It talked about building the ENIAC for bomb calculations in the 50s. and sort of how computing progressed throughout time. And then it sort of finished off at sort of the early 2000s. They talked about Google. They talked about the search engine and the novel approach they had, which was PageRank. And I was like, hey, hang on, I know what Google is. Like, I've worked with Google before, I've used it. And that's how it works. It's PageRank. And that's when I got really excited about programming. And so I figured I would teach myself a programming language, because that's how you tell computers what to do, is what I'd learned. And then I picked up Python. It was Learn Python the Hard Way was the book I used, because I was trying to be hardcore. That was my style. And I sort of learned Python then, but most of my focus was really on like data science and machine learning at that point.
So you started with machine learning right away as soon as you started programming?
Yeah, so I started off with information retrieval. Information retrieval is sort of the field of information science that's associated with organizing and searching and sorting through knowledge, sort of directly associated with the construction of search engines. And so it's like, that Google is a search engine. I'm interested in search engines. I will learn about information retrieval was the rationale I had. And so I picked up a book. It's Introduction to Information Retrieval. I can't remember the authors right now, but it's out of Stanford's.
Okay, and we'll link to all these later on the blog post.
Yeah, definitely. And I read through the book, and I Googled around, and I think it was the summer between my freshman year of high school and my sophomore year of high school. I spent that summer building a search engine. So I built a crawler, I built a term frequency, index frequency sort of.
Wow, that's awesome.
And I'm not sure to this point why I never like got arrested or caught for any of the stuff I was doing, because my crawler was
You're probably on some watch lists.
It was just sending requests out. I had it running at some point for 3 days. It wasn't throttled at all. I'm not sure how I didn't get blocked. I probably did get blocked on something. But it was really that. It was just, I was curious and I didn't know things. And I'll admit that I didn't know things at that time, but I was so eager to learn and build. And so I tinkered around with my search engine for a bit, and then my focus kind of was on language, and the idea of how you input a query into the search engine. Like, why is Google better at understanding the words that I type into it than my own search engine that I like built in my bedroom? And so I started learning about natural language processing, and I read up on that. I was playing around with NLTK a lot, which is a sort of natural language processing library for Python that's aimed for educational uses. And then once I'd kind of gotten sick of the natural language processing, I remember I was on the Wikipedia page for natural language processing, and I clicked on the side, and there was a link, and it was a link to the article on machine learning, and it kind of discussed the fact that NLP was a subset of machine learning, and machine learning was a subset of AI, and kind of covered how all these things were connected. And so my next kind of area of pursuit was machine learning. And I'd say I spent the later part of my sophomore year of high school, my junior year of high school, and then senior year of high school just studying a lot of machine learning. And it was really—
So I have to imagine that it was pretty unusual for a high schooler to be going this deep in it. Did your friends know about it? Do you have them trying out your search engine? Or what did people say about all this?
So this is one of my biggest regrets, and to this day, is I, for the most part, never shared any of the work I was doing. Mostly because, believe it or not, I thought this was like what average kids who were into computer programming did.
Wow.
There is that like myth of the super genius, and I just thought I was one of them, and that wasn't a big deal. So I never really shared any of the work. Some of it I did with my like fellow geeky friends in high school, but I wasn't writing blog posts. I wasn't like making screencasts or anything like that. It was a fairly private endeavor. And that's actually one of my biggest regrets. If I could go back to my high school self, I would like shake her and be like, share what you're doing, tell people.
And did you have classes in high school that, did you take computer science classes there, or was this, okay, so what did they offer?
So I went to an amazing high school. All of my CS professors were really dedicated to bringing computer science to the high school level. And so I had a really fantastic experience. I could take data structures in high school. I could take an introduction to systems class in high school. There was a databases class. So I got like a lot of knowledge that most high school students didn't have access to. And it was a great way to supplement some of the stuff I was just learning on my own. No, I really did not share what I was doing with other people. And I think that's so important in this field, and just in engineering in general and software particularly, is sharing what you're building is so important. And I'm really dedicated now to doing that. It's just going out to speak at conferences, writing a blog post, teaching people, because I didn't do that when I should have been doing it. And I kind of regret that now.
And we're going to get into some of your outreach stuff later. But for now, tell us about what were you doing before college? Did you have any professional work in computer science? And then how did you transition? What was your college search like? And why did you choose Northwestern?
Great question. So when I was in high school, I was part of the robotics team. I'm from Chicago. And so the robotics team had a really close connection with the university. And at one point, we were visiting the neuroscience and robotics lab at Northwestern, and the lab does some really interesting work at the intersection of biology and computer science and robotics, and how we can sort of mimic traits that we see in nature that animals display, and use them to solve our own engineering problems as humans. And I was in love with this because biology was definitely one of the things that I was interested in growing up, and it was a great way to bridge that. So Northwestern was actually the only university I seriously applied to. The others were sort of half-assed applications. And I mentioned just going into the lab and feeling at home, because that was where the things I loved came together. And you find that in so few places. But I rarely go to the lab now because my interests have veered. I guess that's just the normal part of growth, is the things you liked a year or 2 years or 3 years ago are not the things you like now. But other than that, I think Northwestern has a fantastic CS program. It's not known for its CS program, definitely, and I think that's what makes it unique, is you get to engage with professors who really do enjoy their craft. And I just love learning, love discovering new things, obviously, if I haven't made that clear over the past few minutes. And
so I saw in your profile that you have done some professional work. So was that before or during college?
Yeah. So it was before college. So I sort of started off my career in quotation marks, because I have a hard time phrasing it as that, being a 19-year-old. When I was 16, it was my high school had a technical crew, and we were just responsible for some IT duties, dealing with servers here and there. But I think that was super important for my career, because it was the first job I had and the first kind of experience I had where I could see that technology was impactful, and being able to work with it and fix it and make it better had a huge impact, in that case, at the way that people would learn in my high school. And throughout high school, I had a job working for a teacher, just doing consulting, so building websites, doing some SEO. All of that was because I have some knowledge in those fields. And then after high school, my first job was sort of between graduating high school and going off to college, was working at Bank of America. And that was a super awesome experience. It was my first time working in a software team, which is always such a huge leap when you're someone
who... Was it like a summer internship?
Yes, it was a summer internship. So I was very used to kind of working alone, not sharing any of the work I was doing, reading on my own. And I was like comfortable with that, because at that point, to me, software engineering was the interaction between a person and a computer. And that bubble was burst when I realized that software engineering is actually an interaction between a person, a computer, and 20 other people. And it was really hard to like get into the fact that you have to work with teams, there's deadlines, you have to rely on other people and trust they'll do their part on time, and you have to trust yourself and provide what you have to do on time. And so that was a pretty intense, crazy experience for me. And since then, I've sort of striven to have some sort of job during the school year that's technically focused, and a summer internship that's also technically focused. I just really want to get a lot of experience. And I try to not have my jobs focus on data science too much because I do want to have perspective into other sides of the business. I know data science is eventually what I'm going to do, and I'm going to focus on that towards, the later part of college. But for now, I want to see what the people in DevOps are doing, what the people in web dev are doing, what is customer support like, and what is my eventual role as a data scientist in that entire process. Sort of seeing myself as part of that larger teams, because teams are really, programming is not at all about computers. It's just about people, and computers are this thing we put in the middle. And so I really want to develop my strength in dealing with different sides of the business and with different people.
And how has your experience been in college in terms of working with teams? Is it a pretty team-oriented computer science program? And how do you get along with the other students? And do they see you as a star that started really early, or how do you fit in there at the school?
Yeah, so college is definitely an interesting experience for me because there's not a lot of college students flying out to give talks at conferences or doing podcasts and things like that. So it feels weird. I feel like a bit of a stranger at times. And there is definitely that notion of Safia's a little bit of a superstar or whatever. And I try to kind of turn down or kind of deny those accusations as much as possible, because I really don't want to be seen as someone who is better somehow because I started earlier or because I do more. I think those are really, excuse my language, bullshit qualifiers for who's considered a superstar in tech. How long you've been in the industry is completely irrelevant. How much you care about it and how much you're willing to dedicate yourself to it is all that really matters. And so I try to point people to the fact that I'm a superstar, if you want to call me that, and please don't, because I really care about this and I really love it. And I think it's where the future is headed, and it's so important that everyone knows how to code, understands data science, understands how data science is used in the everyday tools and products they use. And that's really my passion, and that's why you would call me a superstar. I'm not a superstar because I was building a search engine when I was 15. It's because I care.
Yeah, and I think that's a common theme, and especially among data scientists, because in data science, so much new stuff is coming out all the time. You're always learning, and you always have to be studying, and so you find, I think, the most passionate people and people willing to help each other and all that within the data science field. So I totally agree with you. It's about the time and effort you put in and sharing that work. So definitely, that's what makes you a superstar, and don't be afraid to call yourself that, even though I know that among college students it probably gives you kind of a stigma. But, so have the courses that they offered at Northwestern been up to par for you? What kind of courses have you taken?
So this is a really great question, and it's so hard to answer because I'm only my second year of university, and I've sort of had to get through excuse my language again, the bullshit requirements you have to take in college.
The general education stuff.
Yeah, the general education stuff. I am getting to the point where I'm taking a lot of the AI and machine learning focused classes, and it's been amazing. It's super important for me as someone who kind of knew about this stuff, being self-taught, to get it reinforced in sort of lecture style academic setting. Because I think those two are very different. The way you teach yourself and present a topic to yourself and the way that a professor might present it to you and then you apply it are different. And in some ways, one is better than the other for a variety of reasons. But I think getting both has been the best of both worlds for me. And so in that way, I feel like the classes have been really great at supplementing what I already know. And also, they're pretty challenging. I try to take the classes that I know I haven't had the chance to completely explore yet. Especially when something's applied in a different way. In this case, in a strictly academic setting, it's different than sort of, looking at YouTube videos online and reading code online and finding books and things like that.
Okay, great. So what's the tech scene like in Chicago? And I know you've gotten involved in some meetups and with PyLadies and things like that. So tell us about how you've branched out outside the college.
Awesome. So that's actually where a big part of my focus is. So I co-organized the PyLadies group in Chicago. PyLadies, for those of you who don't know, is an international organization. It's backed by the Python Software Foundation. As the goal is to build community around female Python developers. So the Chicago chapter actually started fairly recently. We're a little under a year old, but we've been doing a lot of work, obviously. I also work with Chick Tech Chicago. Chick Tech works with high school girls, 100 of them over the course of a year, and we teach them programming, hardware, software, everything in between. And so that's kind of where my main focus and time and energy have been. The tech scene in Chicago is, I would medium-sized. It's not your New York City or San Francisco. And that has some benefits and some consequences, obviously. The main benefit, I think, is it's so easy to build community. Once you have, 5 people who are interested in the same thing, they're really excited about applying it, about working on projects together, about helping each other out. And I think based on my own experiences being in San Francisco for a summer, that's a little bit harder to find in San Francisco than it is here. The consequence, of course, or the drawback is that there's just sometimes not enough people. I remember when I was in San Francisco this summer, I did sort of a workshop series with the local Python meetup there, just covering data analytics and machine learning. And there was a line of people standing outside the door for the building we were meeting at for this Python meetup. I was like, this would never happen in Chicago. And again, there was a consequence to that and a benefit. But I love the community. I'm a fan of the city. I wouldn't like it anywhere else. And that's why I do so many things for tech in Chicago. So you should definitely come live here. Whoever is watching, it's an awesome city to live and work, and the tech scene is growing. So it's great if you want to be kind of someone who joins the growth and helps build something up.
Great. So I'm going to pause for a minute and remind everybody that we're talking to Safia Abdalla, and I'm Renee Teat, and this is the Becoming a Data Scientist podcast. So Safia, since you said you grew up without a lot of tech mentors, how does it feel now to be a mentor to the younger girls?
It feels a little interesting, mostly because like I said, the image I had of like who my mentor would be or who my role model would be when I was young was just me. Like I was my own role model. I just wanted to better myself, and that's all it really was. And so now I have to kind of reposition that and be the role model for these girls. And really my main focus and what I people, especially the younger girls, is like focus on what you know and the fact that you know it damn well, and the fact that no one can tell you otherwise. I think insecurity and imposter syndrome are really big issues, especially for women. And that's probably the reason I didn't share any of the work I was doing in high school. Is I just didn't feel it was worthwhile. And I think that's such an important thing, to be comfortable with your knowledge and also your lack of knowledge, and be willing to kind of fill those gaps is the lesson I try to leave when mentoring girls. And in a way, it's interesting for me because sometimes I'm the mentee in a relationship, and this is ongoing, obviously, but I'm fairly young myself. I'm usually 3 to 4 years older than most of the girls I mentor. So it feels a little weird. I'll be like, in 3 years, girls, you'll be in my shoes. That's very close. But I think it's great to kind of see people who have the potential to be who I am now at like that kind of stage and make a really big impact on their lives. And I think mentoring is not a thing that a lot of software engineers or data scientists do, especially with younger high school students. But it's super important when we talk about pipelines or a lot of other issues. Sometimes it's just going out to coffee with a kid and listening to what they say, because they have the most fantastic dreams and the most fantastic ambitions. And a lot of them have to do with data. It's just no one really takes the time to introduce them to the field. So sitting down with someone is an invaluable experience to them.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's a lot of like learn to code pushes now, just in terms of, the day of code and things like that. But not many people talk about data. And I think it's important for young people to understand data. Like you've got your cell phone and you're on the internet all the time and social media, and you kind of need to understand what's going on there. And I also think that data science is a great field for women. And I think if you got girls interested early on, they're really going to blossom into that. Like it's a very interactive and social kind of programming. And so I recently contacted my local school system just to tell them, hey, I'm available if you want anyone to come talk to the kids about data or data science or databases or programming or anything. And they're super excited to have someone in our field. And so I think that's good to encourage the listeners that anyone out there that has any knowledge about databases and data science, just tell your local school system or any local meetups for young people that, you know, you'll explain it to them and introduce them to data science. And it's really important, I think. And especially with the growth in the industry, like getting them into it now, there's going to be jobs, you know, for them in a few years when they're applying to college and then graduating. So.
I agree. And there's definitely plenty of other places in addition to schools to get involved in. I'm sure we can link to them, but there's no excuse not to, and like no reason you can think of. So you should definitely do it.
Yeah, definitely. And if you're a listener that's interested in getting into data science, you know, check out local meetups, like what Safia was talking about with PyLadies. There are a lot of meetups just popping up everywhere. I'm in small town Virginia, and within an hour, there's a few different meetup programs that I can just drive to after work and hang out. So it's definitely worth getting involved and finding your place locally to get started. Okay, so you've spoken at some big conferences. So tell us about that. How did you get involved, and what was it like speaking at the conferences?
Yeah, sure. So it's really funny because if a year ago you told me I would be speaking at conferences, I would have told you to shut up. That's not true. And you know, this is like the very interesting question about like getting involved in conference talks and public speaking and giving back to the community is the first CFP is always the hardest to submit. My first conference talk was last May, so May 2015. It was at the first local conference that we had in Chicago around data science and web development with Python. And it was held at a local university. I'm not even sure why I decided to submit a proposal now. I just know that I had something to share and I wanted to share, and then I figured this seems like a good way to let people know that I exist and that I am doing work. Again, that kind of like giving yourself a platform and sharing what you do is really important.
So what did you present on at that first one?
I submitted a talk on converting research papers to code. And sort of the notion was that if you are a data scientist, you probably have a tool like scikit-learn that has some pretty popular machine learning models to your data set or in your modeling exercises. But you know, what if you're sort of curious and you like to stray off the beaten path and you find something in a research paper that's really interesting but isn't implemented in a library or a tool? How do you kind of read that research paper and then convert it into code that you can at least use for something? Cool. And so that was my talk, and people loved it. It was not the best talk, as in I felt very short. Like it was 8 minutes and I presented for 15 because I didn't realize that I talk really fast because I'm from Chicago. And it was great having people come up to me afterwards and ask questions and kind of figure out how to do this. And, oh, your talk was really great. I had this idea, I had that idea, and kind of just inspiring thinking in people and new ideas was really awesome. And I was like, this is generally a pretty, like once you do it one time, it's really easy. You kind of figure out what techniques and what kind of abstracts get the most approvals from certain conferences. You figure out what your speaking style is. You learn some good jokes to tell the audience, and it's something you get better at over time. And I love it. I think sort of straying away from the conversation a little bit, but there's a fantastic organization called Write Speak Code. And a lot of the work they do is around getting women who are technical to engage themselves more by writing blog posts, kind of speaking at conferences, and then contributing to open source. And sort of I tick off the speaking and coding portions of that. And I think it's so important to do those things, just to like give talks, share with people. It's hard at first, but genuinely, to anyone listening, it gets easier every time you submit a proposal. And the great tip for those of you getting into kind of public speaking, especially in the data science world, I think it's super important, is you can have a set of like 2 to 3 talks that are on a subject matter that you consider yourself an expert in. So if you are kind of the like genius of random forests, you can have a random forest talk and you can give it at multiple conferences. And sometimes people will reach out to you and say, can you give your amazing random forests talk at our conference? And so it's a very low effort, and you can develop sort of a brand as the random forests expert or whatever have you.
Yeah,
and
that's good advice.
that's so great. Yeah.
Cool. So what was your other favorite talk? So after your first one, since then, what's your favorite talk been that you gave?
So I've had a few. I've done a couple that were just sort of like keynotes at conferences. Keynotes at conferences aimed at high school girls, so it's not as cool as it seems. Probably the best talk that I've given was at a conference in Ottawa, Canada. It's called Beyond the Code, and the talk was sort of condensing my experiences around teaching and how you can be an empathetic teacher, especially when you're teaching software or data science to people, and sort of the techniques that you need to know and what you need to be aware of when teaching. And unfortunately, it wasn't recorded, so only the slides are up, but it was like everything I loved in like 45 minutes, and it was awesome.
Cool. So what are the key points of that talk?
Yeah, so the key points of that talk, I would say, are empathy, really important when you're teaching coding to people, kind of being aware that someone might be from a different ethnicity, might speak a different language. The analogies and metaphors that you use to explain something might not make any sense to them. I sort of described pair programming as a really useful technique when you're teaching. So just have people come in, limit it to one laptop per pair, and as you're teaching, have people work together to like go through a problem set. And that's really important because I think there's sort of this notion in data science and software engineering in general of like gods or people who are super experts and infallible. And, oh my goodness, they're so great at what they do, they could do nothing wrong. And I think that's really a dangerous ideology, the sort of notion of the super genius, because they don't exist and they don't know everything. And so I think when you sit two people together and have them work on something, they realize, hey, I sucked at this one thing and my partner rocked at it, but now I rock at this thing and they're not so good at it. And that's important. It's their strengths and weaknesses, and you're not going to know every model in the world by heart or be an expert at it, but you have ones that you grasp particularly well and you have particular strengths, and that's something I think our industry needs to like snap out of that notion and just accept that people are flawed and everyone is.
It's interesting that you're my second interview and both of you have said very similar things on that, and I have the same feeling that everybody's learning, and if you think you're a god at something, you're probably wrong. And if you think that you suck at something, you're probably wrong. That everyone's kind of somewhere in the middle, and the idea is just keep learning and figure out something you're good at, but you're not going to be good at everything. And usually if you think you're great at something, you're going to find something later that you realize, oh, I totally missed that whole aspect of it.
Stay humble.
Yeah, stay humble, but still it's a mixture of staying humble and then being I had a radio interview on my local radio station, and I was trying to explain to the interviewer, who is not a computer person, that you have to be both humble and cocky. You have to believe that you can do it. I could do anything, I could learn it, but then realize that there's still a long way to go no matter where you're at.
Yeah, it's tough to balance.
Okay, so we can start wrapping up here. So I want to ask you about your goals in the next 10 years and then give you a chance to talk about anything that you want to mention that we didn't cover. So first, where do you see yourself when you finish school, and where are you going to go?
Wow, that's a heavy question. So I mentioned earlier I was really interested in intelligent experiences and sort of can bring the experience of using Siri or using Google to the real world and in places that we don't often find it. I'm really interested in using data science to empower small businesses, because I think if we figure that out and if we enable the little guy and not the person with the giant, God knows how much that they're not really doing anything with, if we empower that and we show people the impact of data at a lower level. Sometimes it's just going to your local store and seeing that they're using data in an intelligent and meaningful way empowers you to then learn about data and use it in an intelligent and meaningful way. You really have to start these things small, in my opinion. And so I want to do a lot of work around data science for small businesses, smaller organizations. I also really want to continue to teach. I'm not sure if I mentioned this earlier in the podcast, but I am teaching a 9-part series on data analytics with PyLadies. And the series is really aimed to be gentle and practical introduction to data science. So we start off with—
How many people are taking that?
So it's capped at 50, just because of the venue and how much I can handle right now.
Yeah, that's still a pretty big group.
Yeah. And so it starts off sort of covering data munging, and the first lesson is intentionally on data munging, designed to be like a very it's a cruel introduction to the fact that data science is not like, the neural networks you hear about that Google's using or any of that cool stuff. It starts off, you get a really messy data set from a bunch of people, and you got to sit for a couple of days or weeks and clean it up. I think showing the nitty gritty to people and showing that sometimes it's really fundamental. It starts there, is super important, and sort of starts at data munging, covers exploratory data analysis, and then it follows it through. We cover visualization, and then we get into modeling on data. And so my goal with that is really to get people who otherwise would not be using data at all. My audience is generally people in the social sciences, people in maths, people who are maybe going to local deaf schools, people who have some experience with data in sort of a scientific setting and a research setting, and are looking to augment that. And I think it's super important to get those people knowledgeable and interested. My focus is always on empowering the people who otherwise would not be empowered. So I really want to continue with that throughout college. And I always have tons of ideas for workshops I want to teach and series I want to teach. And I think I've sort of gotten my teaching style down. And being a college student, I have perspective into what bad teaching looks like. So I have sort of this unique ability to be a student and a teacher at the same time, and I want to kind of continue to be that after graduating.
That's great.
And that's really where I see myself now. It's doing what I'm doing now, I guess. Just don't stop being me.
Great. Well, okay, so what are some resources that you use now to keep learning, or something that you want to highlight that someone else made? And then how do we find out more about you? What's your website, and what kind of things have you made that you want to highlight?
Great question. So I want to highlight this fantastic series on YouTube. For those of you who are interested in machine learning and sort of the theory and the math behind it, a user called Mathematical Monk does this fantastic, it's got tons of episodes, series just covering machine learning. You cover everything from random forest to Markov models, and his teaching style is fantastic. It's sort of Khan Academy-esque, and I'm sure we can link to it in the corresponding write-up, but I go back every day and I watch a video or two of his because they're fantastic. And
Great.
He doesn't get enough credit, but he should, or she, I'm not sure, it's probably a girl, he does not get enough credit for it, because it's great material.
I'll have to put that on Data Sci Guide. I'll link to it there.
Yeah, definitely. It's awesome. And then with respect to where people can find me on the internet, probably Twitter is the best place. I am Captain Safia on Twitter because I am a Star Trek nerd. I usually tweet about classes that I'm going to be teaching. If I have a new blog post up, I tweet about that. If I'm speaking at a conference, I tweet about that. And sometimes I tweet random talks and funny jokes about tech. So that's probably the best place. And from my Twitter, you can get a link to my website, which is safia.rocks. Rocks is a top-level domain that exists, and I feel like not enough people know that. And there you can sort of view my past talks and reach out to me via email and all that jazz. So, yeah.
Well, that's an appropriate website because you definitely rock. And thank you so much for being my guest today. And I'm sure a lot of people are going to get a whole lot from your interview here. So thank you, Safia. And I will definitely stay in touch and see you soon.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Renee.